Everyone, it's Kelly Burns again. A hazard tree management program is a systematic approach for reducing hazard and promoting safety in developed recreation sites. In this segment, we're going to go over the procedures for implementing a hazard tree management program. In this next section, we'll talk about hazard tree management programs and procedures, specifically implementation, documentation, and mitigation. Essentially, there are two ways to go about conducting hazard tree surveys: annual surveys and in-depth surveys. Annual surveys are quicker and entail walkthrough tree inspections aimed at identifying obvious hazards. These types of surveys are conducted prior to the use season and following storms or other types of disturbances. Annual surveys can identify the need for a more in-depth inspection. In-depth surveys are more comprehensive and involve systematic, visual, and tool-based inspections to identify more difficult to detect defects typically associated with tree failures. Typically, in-depth surveys are staggered with annual surveys at a frequency deemed feasible by a line officer. For more information, see the Forest Service Handbook 2309.13, Chapter 50. Similarly, prioritizing sites for hazard tree surveys is ultimately a line officer decision, but some factors to consider include the level of development in the site, how often and for how long the site is occupied, stand conditions such as tree age or stand age and forest health status, history of prior tree failures, and other types of disturbances. In reality, hazard tree survey frequency and intensity should be juggled. We suggest conducting an in-depth survey every 3 to 5 years and then conducting walkthrough surveys in the alternating years and following storms or other types of disturbance to monitor questionable trees. When preparing for your hazard tree surveys, you may need to select a minimum diameter tree that is going to be surveyed. This is because some developed sites can have thousands of smaller trees, which are significantly less prone to internal decay and other defects associated with tree failure. We typically recommend 5 to 7 inches DBH as the minimum diameter to include in your surveys. In any case, it's a good idea to mark smaller dead trees since they are obvious and easy to detect for removal. Hazard tree surveys should be conducted by qualified personnel. As defined in the Forest Service Handbook, qualified personnel are U.S. Forest Service employees or contractors who have completed the regional hazard tree training and who conduct and document hazard tree surveys in accordance with regional guidelines as determined in coordination with the regional forest pathologist or forest health protection specialists. Training should be documented. We can provide documentation to those who successfully complete our trainings. But training is only the beginning. Over time, as you continually conduct hazard tree surveys and evaluate tree failures, you'll gain more and more experience. In the meantime, we're here to help you get started. We can also provide site-specific technical assistance if you have forest health-related issues that you're struggling with, and we can also provide training refreshers. This equipment list is available in the Hazard Tree Management Technical Report on page 24. Most of these items are optional, but you will need the forms and tools such as a hatchet, Pulaski, increment core or drill, probe, and a knife to inspect trees for root disease and or stem decay. And we will go over this in the field when we meet later on. You could access the forms, clinometer, compass, and camera on your smartphone. In terms of performing and documenting hazard tree surveys, we encourage you to use the Region 2 Hazard Tree Evaluation Form because this will ensure all the basic information is collected. Using the form also creates documentation for the survey. When you're conducting your in-depth hazard tree surveys, work the area in a logical, consistent sequence, such as clockwise, by campsite number, or by road segment. This will help prevent missing trees, and it will also help you relocate trees in the future. I showed this diagram in my intro presentation, and it's also available in the Hazard Tree Management Technical Report. It displays the areas that would be assessed in an in-depth survey based on targets and potential impact zones. Targets with low to moderate risk, or those given a target value of 1, are represented in the orange, so basically around trails and roads, while the high-risk targets, or those assigned a target value of 2, are represented in the solid green, and these are the areas around campsites, parking lots, and areas where people would congregate, such as an amphitheater or a park bench. The portion of the campground in Mallow Green has no targets and therefore doesn't need to be surveyed. When assessing trees for defects, begin at the base of the tree and work upwards towards the crown, recording all defects. Look at the tree from different perspectives, up close, from a distance, and all around it. You'll assess whether each defect on the form applies. Pay particular attention to the stem base and the root color, as these are the most common points for trees to fail. And then sound mature or symptomatic trees with a mallet or hatchet. The resulting sound can sometimes indicate if there's a cavity or dead wood present, or if the tree is not solid. If you see any evidence of root disease, such as branch dieback, excessive resin at the base, or dead decayed roots, you'll need to do a more thorough assessment. Do this carefully to avoid causing too much damage. You can very gently probe the bark to identify dead areas and examine the cambium and phloem in the roots to see if it is alive or dead or has any signs of root disease. Similarly, if there's evidence of stem decay, such as sounding hollow or uncertain, decayed branch stubs, large old wounds, cankers, or cavities, you should proceed to core the tree. This can be done with an increment core, a cordless drill, or a resistograph, all of which we'll demo when we go out into the field. You may need to take several cores to adequately assess the thickness of the sound shell, and it's important to keep in mind that even a slight loss in wood integrity results in large losses in wood strength. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, you can use an increment borer, a cordless drill, or a resistograph to assess these trees further for decay. And each of these methods has its own strengths and weaknesses. The borer is really easy to carry around with you in the field. They're not super expensive, but they do leave a larger hole that takes a longer time to heal. The cordless drill still leaves kind of a large hole, smaller than the increment borer, but it's really quick. I don't think it's as easy to assess the integrity of the wood with the cordless drill, but it's good in certain circumstances. And then the resistograph is really expensive. It's really big and bulky to carry around with you, but it's really accurate. And it gives you an actual measurement with a very small hole that's really quick to implement. The resistograph is an instrument that detects decay in cavities in trees and timber with a micro drill and special software. It's considered minimally invasive. The resistograph can detect wood decay, stages of rot, hollow areas, cracks, and ring structure. A flat line indicates no resistance to the drill or a hollow or decayed area, while a jagged line indicates resistance and stronger wood. The slowly descending pattern in the output shown in this slide indicates a progressively worsening decay column. We like to remind people to be particularly gentle with aspen. Don't sound aspen except if it has very thick bark, and don't bore or drill it either. If you're really suspicious that something bad is going on in the tree, it's probably best just to assume the worst. Even small little nicks and scrapes on aspen can lead to decay and cankers. We do recommend tagging and stem mapping trees in your campgrounds. This will aid with documentation, mitigation, and interpreting stand conditions for long-term vegetation management. It also really helps relocating trees for future surveys. Stem mapping has become easier and easier over the last 10 years. If you use the Survey 123 app to collect your data and you have a good GPS signal on your phone, the stem mapping is done for you, and maps can be downloaded from the cloud once you're back online in ArcGIS Online. Another benefit of stem mapping is that you can convert your data into a spatial file, such as a shapefile, that can be easily generated from ArcGIS Online, and then GIS maps can be queried to display trees that meet certain criteria. For example, you could make a map of all the trees that need to be removed, all the trees with root disease, all the trees of a certain species, and whatnot. So this is going to greatly expedite mitigation and also your future surveys and vegetation management and planning. And like I said earlier, we do recommend tagging and or marking your trees. And this could be as in-depth as permanently tagging all the trees and accurately mapping all the trees at your site. Or you could temporarily tag trees that are above the minimum hazard rating that you designate you want to start at. Or you could also just mark the trees that need to be removed during the inspection. So a lot of times we will just flag the trees that need to be removed as long as they can be removed in a reasonable amount of time. So it's really important to document everything. You're going to want to document your hazard tree inspection protocol, your plans for long-term inspections and mitigation plans and schedules. It's important to document the training you've taken, the results of your inspections, whether or not any mitigations have been implemented, and then also documenting tree failures is really important as well to gain information on species profiles and why trees fall and when trees fall. In this next segment, we're going to talk about mitigation. Basically, what can you do about it if you do have hazard trees? When the inspection is complete, a rating threshold for mitigation should be determined. The level of risk that is tolerable is up to the line officer. We suggest promptly mitigating all high priority hazard trees or those with a hazard rating of 6, monitoring or mitigating those with moderate hazard potential, the 3s and the 4s, and no action or monitoring of trees with low hazard potential or those with a hazard rating of 2 or less. Hazard trees are addressed in a core national quality standard in the directive. The WO is currently working on this part of the directive to provide additional guidance on high priority hazard trees. If mitigation measures cannot be completed within a reasonable time frame, the responsible official or line officer should notify the public of the hazard and determine whether the site should be closed until corrective actions can be taken. One obvious way to mitigate hazard is to remove defective trees from the site. Make sure to consult with a certified silviculturist before doing any significant tree removal to avoid issues with wind firmness in the residual stand. If too many trees are removed at once, the remaining trees lose their ability to withstand strong winds. In some situations, the hazard potential is so great that the site must be closed, either temporarily or permanently. This is a picture from Vallecito Campground in the San Juan National Forest that had to be closed for root disease mitigation back in the 1990s. Risk can also be reduced by restricting the target area. For example, permanent tent pads can be constructed. Rather than closing the whole campground, just the affected portion could be closed, or picnic tables and benches can be moved outside the potential impact zone. While it can be effective in urban settings, cabling or bracing is usually not practical or desirable in developed recreation sites in the Rocky Mountain region. One possible treatment option that is gaining more popularity for dealing with dead trees is to top them so they can still provide some structural diversity, wildlife habitat, and old growth aesthetics, but they pose little hazard. And they also provide a target for hatchet throwers, so maybe to divert them from the living trees. Large dead branches and brooms, particularly dead brooms, can also be pruned out to reduce hazard. Research has shown that pruning out large live brooms can actually increase tree vigor and substantially prolong the tree's life. One of the major causes of wounding, resultant disease, and hazard in campgrounds is campers. Axe throwing, chopping, dumping hot ashes at tree bases, and other common damages cause permanent injury to trees that lead to decay and defect. It's important to educate campground hosts to encourage campers to care for trees. A signing and public education campaign was recently initiated to help prevent such damage. We have these posters available for camp hosts to display in campgrounds. Feel free to reach out and we can share them with you. Vegetation management is simply proactive management of vegetation to maintain the quality of developed sites into the future. In the long term, hazard tree management should be considered in the context of vegetation management. We can't continually remove trees from our developed sites without planning for regeneration and replacement. There's no better time than the present to plan for future stands. An interdisciplinary, comprehensive vegetation management plan can help reduce disease, insect, and fire risk while providing for vegetation that is suited to the site with a minimum of hazards. Vegetation management is important for any developed site. A few examples include campgrounds, picnic sites, trailheads, boat launches, and interpretive sites. There are constant challenges to maintaining sustainable vegetation in developed recreation sites. Some examples include camper damage, insect and disease outbreaks, animal damage, trampling and soil compaction, defensible space, invasive weeds, lack of regeneration, inappropriate tree species, and of course, hazard trees. Forest Health Protection provides fundings to the state's national forests and other federal land management agencies for suppression, prevention, and restoration of forest insect and disease issues. We don't provide funding for hazard tree management, but we do provide funding for specific insect, pest, or disease issues. For example, if you had an insect outbreak or root disease issue in your developed site, you could apply for funding to assist with management. We put out a call every fall, which is typically due in November. Feel free to reach out to one of us if you're interested in learning more about funding opportunities through Forest Health Protection. That concludes the virtual portion of our training. We hope this provided a good introduction to hazard tree management, and we look forward to digging deeper with some hands-on experience during our upcoming training day in the field. In the meantime, feel free to touch base with us with questions or visit our website that has lots of useful information on hazard tree management. The easiest way to access our website is to Google R2 Forest and Grassland Health and navigate to the hazard tree management page. We look forward to seeing you soon.
I'm going to go through some of the questions. But that's the culmination of all of our PowerPoints. So essentially we have until noon if people want. Otherwise we can finish early as well. I'll answer all the questions down here. And a lot of it, I think, is the confusion between the dates. So Alex, you have June 1st is Grand Mesa. And that's correct. So June 1st is the Grand Mesa Visitor Center. May 31st is Divide Forks Campground. Initially, we had that changed, and we have modified that in the schedule. And so if I've sent you out the locations, I know some people have reached out to me directly. Those should be the correct dates because I'm sending out the invites from our teams. Thanks. But if you do have any questions, you can reach out to myself, Kelly, or Julie Jackson, and we will all be able to answer some of those questions as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too, for the people that are interested in that are wanting to participate in the Lake George training, if you could just send me an email or let me know. I'm having trouble keeping track of everybody because there's been invitations from different people. If you could just get in touch and let me know you're planning on attending that, that would be really helpful. And then I will send out an invite to everybody with more specific information on that training.
Yes, I would suggest, so Chris asked the question, should we recommend having a tablet set up with Survey 123 before the field surveys? That is definitely beneficial. So you can do a tablet or phones. For the trainings that I have down in the Gunnison area, I'm going to have Survey 123 on my phone, as well as logged into 3 different tablets. So I will be bringing that from our crew. But if you have your own, by all means, bring that, because the more experience you have of inputting the data yourself, the better off you're going to be in the end. So we're going to give you all of these resources through FHP, and we will give you these trainings, but we definitely won't be out there every day with you. So we're just giving you those tools for your toolbox of hazard tree management. So if you are not set up in Survey 123, I will get your name out to Elise Bone, like I mentioned earlier, So everybody who attended today, and thank you for putting in your names if you had more than one person. So I'll get those sent out to your respective forests so you can download whatever forest you will be inputting data on. And again, it'll be that 3-digit code. So depending on each forest, we will have that within our Survey 123 guide as well. And if you have any questions, just let me know. But when you're in Survey 123, if you put in the hazard tree, so capital H, capital T _ and then just do the document that I'm set up with up above. Let's see, I'm going to scan up to it, but I gave the information of the names. So as long as you put that in there correctly, then it'll have all 9, I believe 9 forests or so forth that we have, and all respective forests that you'll be able to download. But you'll need access specifically to your individual forest before you can download it. If you want to play around with it for the training, you can do that as well. And we have the username and password within the chat. Shane, do you have a question?
No, sir. I don't. I'm not sure
Okay.
why. I have my hand up or something. Sorry.
Not a problem. I saw Ruth, you have your hand up as well.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right, nice to meet you. I'm the safety manager on the GMUG, and I just had kind of like maybe a big picture question about this. How, I know we've been doing this kind of collection for a really long time. Do we have an idea of how well we're actually implementing mitigations based on the assessments that we've done? Like how many hazard trees have we removed over the years, and how many do we have on the books that need to be removed or dealt with in some way? Do you know that information?
I don't off the top of my head. Documentation should be within each district. But from my experience in talking with Julie, specifically in the GMUG and other forests that I deal with in Southwest Colorado, some districts have documentation of trees that have been identified and removed, but they're typically those more severe hazards. Some people don't document. And so having this training will give you those tools to be able to start this process. And so without documentation, in a sense, the way I like to say it is that even if you remove trees, it didn't happen. So you can see the physical stumps, you identify what happened, but we need to actually document this to give proof that it happened. And so that's kind of what we're pushing forward here. So
is there
I don't think
benefit? Is there
Sorry,
a benefit or a drawback to documenting? Like who's keeping score here?
And I mean, it's just when you're identifying these trees, you can identify based on our hazard tree management if a tree, like their defect rating and their hazard tree rating. We give you options as well for notes. And so not all, I like to say not all severe hazards are created equal, because some trees might not have extensive internal decay, and you can actually document that and be like, we didn't remove it because of X, Y, Z. But if you have no documentation, you can't do that. If a tree failed and it's a green tree, you want to document every single tree that has a target, because Mother Nature can change. High winds, things of those sorts, extreme weather might have trees fail. And if you identify it as a low hazard or moderate, you still did your due diligence. So we're just trying to cover our bases, and Kelly can go to more extent as well.
I just wanted to interject that if in the event that we get sued too, having documentation is huge. So like I just was deposed last year for a lawsuit that's going on concerning a hazard tree. And I had all my records of, like, they wanted me to provide records and train for who had been attending our trainings for the last 10 years. You know, how many had, you know, who was there, when they were there, who they worked for, you know, all this kind of stuff. How many hazard, you know, they're going to ask you tons of questions. And so if you do have documentation, it's going to make us look a lot better, I think. Even if something happens that causes damage, If you are showing that you're working towards a hazard tree management program, it's better than having nothing. You know what I'm saying? And I just think it's going to help us out a lot more in the long run if we keep these things documented.
All right, well, thanks. It's just an interesting topic, and thanks, Matt, for your comment there about the Gunnison stuff. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, for explaining that.
Hey, Brad, I do have a
Yes, sir.
question now.
Yep.
And so I'm sorry I've raised my hand a couple times prematurely.
Here.
But they were all leading up to this question, so that's all right. Hey, I was kind of had a couple questions in maybe in relation to survey 1, 2, 3. And once we submit them, those submit our each survey to the group there, is it going to be possible for us to go back and see the collection of those surveys, or is there going to be maybe like a spreadsheet or something like that that they're going to compile in? That way, whenever we do go back, we can. I guess maybe I've seen a question here too related to that in the chat about how we're supposed to document trees that were removed. And so if we're going in there and we're submitting hazard trees, is there a way for us to do that, or should that be something we track through our own district and on our own program?
Yeah, so you can download all the data. So you can do it as a shape file, or you can do an Excel document as well. The report formings that Jim Blodgett, so the pathologist up in Rapid City, put together, will be able to have documentation for all those trees as well. And so you can document yourself. I don't believe within survey 1, 2, 3, if you can delete a tree. So I'll look into that to confirm. But it does a great job to identify the trees and have an actual location, GIS things, GPS locations, things of those sorts. But once you download it, then you can make notes as well. But I do believe you can edit the document within survey 1, 2, 3 and go from there. But you don't want to actually delete it, because once it's deleted, it's gone. So you want to keep it and make notes if they've removed things of those sorts. So the reporting forms are things that we're trying to move forward on, because the hazard tree database that we had within Access was kind of that archaic form that wasn't necessarily used. And we're trying to make it as easy as possible. So we will have a reporting forms essentially for this survey 1, 2, 3 technical report that come out in the near future. So it'll explain exactly how to download these, everything that you need to do for both the tree failures and so forth in the hazard tree evaluations.
Sweet, thank you, Red.
Yeah, and you got the same question that Barrett asked. So he asked, how are we supposed to document trees we removed? And that is essentially based on, so you can download your data. You will have access to everybody's data from your forest. So it won't be just data that you have inputted. So you can identify everything there. The tree failure form would be trees that have failed that were not removed. And so you want to keep an identification of this as well, because as you're looking at tree failures, you want to see trends. So do you have root failures? Do you have trees that have been failing due to stem decay, potentially branch failures, things of those sorts that are particular to a specific site? So if you're identifying these over time, you can identify how there are trends, and maybe if those trends are changing or if we do see similarities. So if you have a large spruce that have stem decay, and you have hundreds of those or even tens of those, you want to note that, because if they are failing, there's going to be that trend that you can identify and manage that via your vegetation management for the future. Julie mentioned as well, for those of you interested in attending a GMUG field training, you can please reach out to her. You can send me an invite as well, so we both have those. And so you can accept the invites so we know who are going to those each 9 trainings. So I see, and then Thomas here, you said that you'll be there at the Grand Mesa. If you just want to, if you have not, can you RSVP to that meeting as well? So we have Teams invites, essentially placeholders, so we can identify who's going to show up. but with around 50 people from the GMUG and people from outside entities throughout these 9, we kind of want to identify who's going to be showing up so we know who the head count will be. In these 3 weeks or the 9 trainings, we're going to be focusing on actually going to Forest Service operated sites and starting to implement these hazard tree evaluations. So a little bit less formal training in the field, but we'll go over all the defects. So I will be jumping around to each group, but we'll actually physically be doing the hazard tree evaluation. So kind of getting the ball rolling at 9 different sites. So that's the plan, is to focus on specifically the Forest Service operated sites, because as long as we have those done and documented, then we can move forward on an actual training schedule, or an evaluation schedule, depending on those in-depth surveys, and then alternating again with those walkthrough surveys on other subsequent years. I'm sure I missed something in the chat, so if there's anything else, just let me know.
Barrett has his hand up for you, Brad.
Yeah, Barrett. Thank you, Julie.
Morning. Thanks for the training as usual, Brad. It's always really in depth. Just to follow up on the documentation stuff, as you know, the majority of us are lucky to be able to do our annual surveys every year, which are relatively informal, and even the policy shows that they're kind of informal. What are you thinking? I know there's no perfect answer here, like, yeah, do this. Generally with a walkthrough annual survey, you know how it is. We're looking at recently dead trees, things that are leaning, things that have fallen, very obvious hazard trees. And then usually, in that same day, we cut and remove them.
Mhm.
So that's, try to. So like, are you okay? I mean, what do you guys think about, like, things like, hey, on, 6/23/23, we remove approximately 25 trees from, X campground. But that's not really like specific, because if you don't have a survey 1, 2, 3 in-depth analysis done yet, you don't have each tree, named, marked, numbered, named, and marked. So you can't really document it as that one. You know what I mean? So just thoughts on that, like spitballing.
Yeah, so in a sense, I've only been in this position for 3 years, and we've been trying to revise how we assess hazard trees throughout this time frame, and a lot of it has been based on the litigation that we have is currently ongoing on the Pike. And what they noticed is that through the depositions and things of those sorts, there were glaring kind of misconceptions on who was responsible, things of those sorts, and what exactly we needed to do. With that being said, there were surveys, like informal surveys, done. And so having the ability to have an informal survey or those walkthrough surveys still didn't necessarily cover us to state that we're identifying the most severe hazards. But somehow this tree persisted and stayed and failed and then injured somebody. And so that's why we're suggesting to go through and do the in-depth surveys, regardless of kind of the status quo that you've been going through. So I know, like, what your crew does in Barrett and Paonia area does a great job to remove those more severe hazards, and it's a large time commitment to be able to perform these hazard tree evaluations. But without the overall documentation for every single tree that has a target, we're essentially not covering our basis and allowing us to be covered if there are failures. So it's a tricky question. It's difficult because the workforce might not be able to bode well to be able to perform these. But we're just trying to put ourselves in a better situation later. So, and again, we've talked about how you guys work at Paonia and you guys do a great job. But without having those initial in-depth surveys, it's really hard to move forward. So I'm just trying to put the brakes a little bit and make
So
this
basically,
program.
like, we need that baseline kind of no matter what, and then annual surveys after that. You would go back into your survey 1, 2, 3 form that is your baseline, and try to document which trees were removed, for instance, during that annual walkthrough that you do all the time.
Yeah,
or-
that's our goal.
Or which ones failed, for instance, throughout the winter. Yeah. And
Yeah,
then
and I
Julie,
think-
maybe this question's for you. And I know that there's a lot of back and forth on concession run campgrounds, and we have policy, not to do anything in it, or that letter that came out not to do anything in them. But there is that limbo and gray area where many ranger districts, including us, operate concession run campgrounds during the non-concession season as Forest Service run campgrounds. And so in the past, as you know, Julie, and probably you know this too, Brad, like oftentimes that's when we cut trees out of them. It's before the operating season or after the operating season. So thoughts on that? I mean, should we not even be doing these in-depth surveys in there if they are like the majority of time they're run by a concessionaire? Is that kind of where that thought process is going on that, or any thoughts?
I'll let Julie answer that since she's the forest employee.
That's not fair,
Sorry,
Brad. That
sorry,
one's
Julie.
going towards
And I'm sure it's
you.
not just the GMUG, you know, I mean, all forests have
It is not.
almost all forests have some amount of concessionaires running things, and this is definitely a gray area. Well, it's not that, yeah,
Yeah.
it's still pretty gray. The shoulder seasons are the gray thing right now. So,
Yeah, and they're gray. And at this point, we're trying to, you know, focus on the non-concessionaire sites right now. But if we are opening them, from my understanding, on the off seasons of when the concessionaire isn't there, then we are responsible for them. So, you know, if you're doing them on the off season when they're not in the site, then you're fine in that realm.
so along those
this is
same
one
lines
thing that-
then, sorry, we should probably be doing a baseline, we should be getting towards doing a baseline in-depth survey. Like we're gonna do, I know we're focusing on our non-concession sites, and it's gonna be great training, but it should be on the plan to do our concession sites. We might not be able to hold the concessionaire responsible for during, they should probably do their own, I guess. They probably can't use ours, for instance, right? Like there's probably some legal, you know, back and forth that they can't use our survey, we can't use theirs or something like that. But during the shoulder seasons, we should be using ours then, in theory.
Yeah, and we can talk to the concessionaires, and I can, you know, as the permit administrator, can
Right.
give them in writing, you know, our concerns, and then they take care of them when they're operating. So we can talk back and forth. That's not,
So for instance,
you
we
know,
could
we
do
just can't.
we could do a survey, download it into an Excel spreadsheet, you know, maybe say we removed this, you know, tree A, you know, spruce A1, you know, we removed in April and yada, yada, yada. And then say, here's the rest of the survey. This is what we think is our, you know, concerns or watch outs or whatever, something like that.
Correct.
I'm sure it has to be formal, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then to
And
go a
that's the
step
way I've been
further,
doing it.
you know, Forest Service Hermetic 2309, Chapter 50 is developed site management. It is not campground management. So in theory, we need to be starting to move to any developed site. It does not say number 3 or higher. The
Yeah,
handbook does
and
not say 3 or higher.
that's a great thing too, because when we deal with OGC as pathologists and they want us to consider what we are talking about hazard trees, we don't consider a stage of developed site. We're not looking at our scale 1 through 5. We are looking at the signs of a tree that might fail.
Right.
And so when you look at the development of what is a 2 or a 3 on these
Mhm.
developed sites, there's a very, very fine line between the two, because if you read the wording, it's the same.
Yeah,
Um,
totally. I mean, this goes back to our conversation that we started to have with I forget her name, but the OGC lawyer that was on our last call. It was like, do you understand what's going on here? Like that there are tons of 1s and 2 sites all over the place with plenty of dead trees, or just trees, I guess, you know, they don't have to be dead, just trees. So
Yeah,
that's
so
a
we do.
larger question, but it's things to be thinking about. I mean, it's a trailhead, right? It's a developed site to trailhead with a kiosk and a number in infra that says, you know, through line trail. That's a developed site with targets, 1s and 2s.
I totally
Right.
agree with you. Larry.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's a dangerous road. I mean, it's scary. I mean, it's like, you know, it's scary in the terms of the workload is just, I mean, it's basically impossible, as you know, to do a full in-depth survey for every single developed site in the National Forest System. Not going to happen. So anyway,
Yeah, and I think your question too about working with concessionaires on some of those sites that are utilized, that is a thorn in my side, because it's difficult in a sense, because if we are taking on responsibility for a certain amount of time of the year, the concessionaire has it during their operating season. That's where that gray area comes into place. I don't know the question about who would be responsible or if we have to double up. My thought is that yes, we'll probably have to double up on these surveys because we don't want to utilize the concessionaires and we don't want to let them utilize ours. And that is probably what the OGC will say.
that's what it is you're saying. They shouldn't. So we really, let's say we have a campground that's low elevation, right? So normally we open it in April-ish, and RRM doesn't start operating it until when they can make money, which is usually after Memorial Day. So there's about a month in there that is operated by us. If we do an in-depth survey, we really, on survey 1, 2, 3 and download it into Excel, what I was hearing is we probably shouldn't send it to them and say, here's a great survey to use. They should probably do their own after that.
I don't think that that question has been segued in some of these
Right.
surveys. Yep. And I know they are they're revising the Forest Service handbook for concessionaire campgrounds, informing them that they're responsible for hazard tree management plan, which will kind of differ from what they actually commented with all of those, but we have to move forward with our guidance. And so how do we now do that? Understanding that we have been responsible for vegetation management, and having those in-depth surveys will actually push both our Forest Service and our concessionaire operated sites moving forward in that vegetation management for the future. Regardless who does it, we just want to make sure it happens.
Right.
And hopefully the people who put these together are trained when we're looking at concessionaire sites. That's the tricky part.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
know
and
that
our
they're kind of
policy does state that, if we see something and we want to identify it to the concessionaire, once they go in, then me as the permit administrator can document it and send it to them and say, hey, we've identified this. But
right.
we can't go in there and actually do the work. They need to do the work. They need to do that. So we can identify it with them as it states right now. But,
Right, I understand that, but you know how it is. Like, you're supposed to walk through, document it, give it to you. You have to give it an official letter to them. So 2 weeks later, you might get trees cut. But yeah, it's the shoulder season stuff, and that's where, like, if we cut all the trees out in April, maybe there's nothing to identify anymore. But anyway.
And that's stuff that me and Brad are talking about, and how we're going to proceed in the future with these situations. And right now we're focused on the easier part of the non-concessionaire sites right now, just to get a protocol in place of how we're going to do this, and then tackle that gray area of how are we going to work this, and working with you guys and everybody on the forest to come up with a plan on that.
Yeah, Brad's gonna have to help us out as a mathematician with all of our shell thicknesses. So
yes. My wife makes fun of me because I like to do our budget all the time, and I like to use a calculator, so I can. But when Julie and I talked to all the district rangers, specifically on the GE mug, your question as well came out of essentially what sites would we stop at development wise. So like some of them would be like, I only have one, or I have none, but I have all these trailheads and I have all these other locations. So I think that's something that will continue to develop. And so we'll kind of give the guidance as we learn more, but until then, use good judgment.
Yeah, we're just going to focus on the top down. Yeah, do the biggest stuff first. I mean, I think we all do it to some degree. Like, if you're at a trailhead and there's a bunch of dead timber right around that, we try to mitigate as much as possible. Do any of us have these in-depth survey 1, 2, 3, or even the old forms for trailheads? I bet you it's like none. So,
yeah.
But again, as you know, a lot of annual maintenance is done, or annual inspections, informal inspections. But all we can do it now. Or all Gunnistons develop dispersed campgrounds, campsites.
Um,
Okay,
and I
thank
see-
you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Barrett. Those are great questions. See, Michael, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, hey guys, it's Jason. So I share some of his concerns, and I think he's right. It's really difficult to find ways to capture every bit of every single site and every hazard tree on every site. But I would just kind of point out this is the importance of why having some sort of record keeping on your forest is really important. So we may not have a baseline survey for every single site, but if someone cruises through and sees, hazard trees or something needs to be dealt with at a trailhead, getting it down on paper is still going to give us some of that protection. Where it may not be, or we're looking at data over time, like we would with, say, a campground. Having something written down in that reporting system, or in that reporting or monitoring system, or database, I guess you would say, will help. So.
Yes, and I like to do that as well. That's why we have the paper form on top of the Survey 123, because there are times that maybe you don't have access to that Survey 123 app. So you can write down all the notes that you have, get a GPS location, and then you can input it into Survey 123 if you feel necessary to do that as well. One thing I don't think that was mentioned with Survey 123 is that if you do not open the app when you have phone service, you will also not have GPS. So that's one thing to take into account. Otherwise, you're using a glorified survey of just identifying trees. You don't have an actual GPS location. So just make sure that you're aware of that kind of misgiving of the app. But I always like to just have my GPS on hand as well. Input data while you're doing it, just because it doesn't take a ton of time. But yeah, like a lot of this work takes a long time, but anything documented is going to be more than what we currently have. Just because when I reach out to districts, like what Barrett said, like they cut trees and they remove them that day. When I talk to OGC, if we are not essentially documenting some of those trees, to them, it never happened. And so I always feel like I'm a bearer of the bad news, because I come out and identify the worst of the worst trees. I don't typically get to look at healthy trees, which is kind of sad in a sense. But like we're here to just inform you all of kind of how we can move forward to identify the trees and make these sites safer in the future. But yeah, I mean, that's all I have for all of you. Those are great questions. I'm glad that we had some conversation in the end. If you would like to give feedback, I know it wouldn't be anonymous, but if you want to reach out just to how this format went today, it's a little bit different than what we're used to, but we're still probably trying to feel out the kinks, make sure everything works well to be able to get this more streamlined for everybody. But having the videos will essentially allow us to send them out to everybody. So you have more access to identify this in the future rather than just having a one-day training. So yeah, anything that you have for us, just let us know. And luckily the hiccups were very minor in just downloading videos. So I'm glad that that occurred, some sound issues. And Shane, I see you have your hand up again. Yeah, one last question for us.
I don't think it's Shane, but it's
Oh, never mind, Jonathan. I saw Shane's up earlier and then it went down. Sorry, Jonathan.
okay. I just hearing, we have a lot of
Thank
ability
you.
to change the Survey 123 apps when we know that there's something that could benefit the form, And so I'm just wondering who the product owner is for the hazard tree forms, and if just a simple another drop down field could be added to the bottom of the form where you say it'd be a simple was hazard mitigated, yes or no, because that would be I think a really helpful documentation piece as we're out there and trying to utilize these electronic tools that are making things more efficient. Yeah, and then that would be in there, and it would service documentation.
Yeah.
Kind
No,
of have to go back.
I think that's great. So we have Jim Blodgett. So since I started in 2020, these were already put together. But the pathologist up in Rapid City developed these, and Jim and I have both taken the courses on the Survey 123 development apps, so we can both edit these. But if you could send both Jim and I, just have us both on the email and just send that, just because as soon as I'm done today, I'm done for the week, so I don't want to forget. But yeah, if you could just send us an email, I think that's a great suggestion, because then we have documentation, we have a drop down to actually do that. Yeah. No, thank you, John.
Thank you guys. Thanks for training.
Yeah. All right, we've got one more hand up. Does anybody have any more questions? I see you have one, Michael.
Yeah, I'll just kind of write on what he was saying. I would probably go one step further and include what mitigation was used.
Okay.
You guys do
I
that.
like that. Yeah, Jonathan, if you could just include that too. Yeah, we can add that. It's pretty simple. So I think that's good. One hiccups is
I'm
when we
just curious,
updated.
what would
you have to
what
download
would
it.
the list
Yeah.
include? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just
it.
wondering if you can elaborate on what the list would include, just like removing or pruning. What else?
I might not provide a list. I'd maybe just provide a notes of,
Notes,
you know,
Oh,
is it
that's a good
mitigated or
idea.
not?
Okay.
Yep.
And then that way, if it's not mitigated, you could describe why you didn't mitigate it or what was going on there.
Mhm.
If it's
Perfect.
identified.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. I just love that idea. That's really going to improve this.
Yeah, and if we don't have any more comments or questions, I can leave you all with 25 minutes of your lives that you can enjoy. I really appreciate you guys all coming today, and I'm glad it went off without too many hiccups. So thank you very much. And again, if you want to send feedback, please do so. You can send it to Kelly or I, or Julie as well. But yeah, just thank you again for participating, and I look forward to seeing everybody in the field.
See you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, Brad.